The nursing home called at 3:15 a.m. on a Wednesday, and the night nurse said, "Your father passed an hour ago, but he left a sealed envelope with his final instructions." And I was stunned because my father had not spoken a single word to me in over 20 years. This isn't the story you think it is about a hidden fortune or a dramatic inheritance, and I didn't walk out of that facility with money because what I found inside that envelope was a single sheet of paper with the name of a billion-dollar company, written in his shaky handwriting. I am Thomas Edward Reynolds, 52 years old, a high school janitor in Akron, Ohio, and I have spent my entire adult life believing my father, Harold Reynolds, was a broken man who had nothing left to give anyone, including his own son. My mother died when I was 16, a sudden heart attack on a cold January morning in 1988, and after that, my father retreated into silence, rarely speaking, rarely eating, rarely acknowledging that I even existed in the same house as him. If you have ever felt like a parent chose silence over you, or if you have ever wondered what a dying man might say if he finally found his voice, please subscribe and stay with me because I need to tell you what I found in that envelope. My father had been a mid-level accountant at a manufacturing company for 34 years before he retired, and he had never shown any ambition beyond paying the bills and keeping food on the table for our small family in our modest house on Hickory Street. He never talked about work, never mentioned promotions or achievements, and when I asked him about his job, he would just shrug and say, "It pays the bills, Tom, and that's all that matters in this life." I remember the exact date, June 14, 1995, when I told my father I was dropping out of community college because I couldn't afford tuition, and he just nodded and said, "I understand, son. I never had much luck with school either. I worked odd jobs for years, construction, warehouse shifts, anything that paid enough to keep me afloat, and I married a woman named Karen who left me after 7 years because she said I had no ambition and no future." My father never defended me, never offered advice, never even seemed to notice when I stopped calling. And I convinced myself that he simply didn't care about me or my life, and I made peace with that cold truth. I became a janitor at East High School in Akron, earning $19 an hour, and I rented a small apartment on Copley Road for $650 a month, driving a 2004 Ford Focus with 200,000 miles on it. According to a 2023 report from the National Council on Aging, approximately 1 in 10 older Americans experience some form of abuse or neglect, and financial exploitation costs victims roughly $36 billion annually, but I never thought my father was a victim of anything. My father was placed in the Cedar Ridge Nursing Home in Cuyahoga Falls in 2010, and I visited him only 4 times in 13 years, each visit more painful and awkward than the last, because he would just stare at the television and say, "Nothing." The nurses told me he was well-behaved and quiet, and they said he kept a small metal box under his bed that he never let anyone touch, not even the staff who cleaned his room every single morning without fail. I never asked about the box because I assumed it was just old photographs or meaningless trinkets from a life that had long since passed him by, and I didn't want to disturb whatever peace he had found in his final years. The call came at 3:15 a.m., and I sat in my apartment in the dark, holding the phone, trying to process the fact that my father had died without me ever really knowing who he was or what he had been through. I drove to the nursing home in the pouring rain, and the night nurse, a woman named Diane, handed me the envelope, a plain white thing with my name written in my father's familiar, shaky handwriting. She said, "He told me to give this to you personally. He said you would know what to do with it, and that it was the most important thing he had ever written in his entire life." I opened the envelope in my car, sitting in the dark parking lot, and I unfolded the single piece of paper inside, and what I read made my hands tremble and my heart stop for a long, terrifying moment. The paper was dated August 12, 2008, and it read, "To my son Thomas, I am sorry I never told you this, but I was the lead accountant at Remington Manufacturing, and I discovered that the company was engaging in widespread fraud and falsifying financial records." The letter continued. "I reported my findings to the CEO, Harold Sterling, and he threatened to destroy me if I ever spoke to anyone about it. He said he would take everything I had and make sure my family never worked again." My father wrote, "I stayed silent because I was afraid for you, Tom. I was afraid that if I spoke up, they would come after you and your mother, and I couldn't bear to put you in that kind of danger." He wrote, "But I kept evidence, Tom. I kept copies of the fraudulent documents, the false financial statements, the internal memos that proved what Sterling was doing. I kept them hidden in a safety deposit box at the bank on Main Street." The letter said, The company is now a billion-dollar corporation called Sterling Industries, and I want you to take the evidence I left and do what I never had the courage to do. I want you to expose them for what they are." I sat in my car, rain streaming down the windshield, and I wept because I realized my father's silence was not indifference, it was protection, a shield he had built around me at the cost of his own peace. According to whistleblower protection laws established under the Sarbanes-Oxley Act, employees who report corporate fraud are legally protected from retaliation, but my father had been terrified of what might happen to me if he spoke up. The National Council on Aging estimates that elder financial abuse costs older Americans between $2.6 billion and $36.5 billion annually. But my father's silence was not about money, it was about love, twisted and silent, but love nonetheless. I went to the bank the next morning, and I used my father's key to open the safety deposit box, and inside, I found a stack of documents, financial records, memos, and a letter addressed to me. The letter was dated 3 weeks before my father was placed in the nursing home, and it said, "I am losing my memory, Tom, and I am afraid I will forget everything, including why I stayed silent for all those years." He wrote, "But I want you to remember that I loved you even when I couldn't say it. I loved you enough to protect you from a fight I wasn't sure I could win, and I am sorry I never told you the truth." I stood in that bank vault, holding a folder of evidence against a billion-dollar corporation, and I felt a rage that I had never allowed myself to feel before, a rage at the men who had stolen my father's voice. According to a 2024 study from Cornell Law, nearly 60% of estates end up under court control due to improper planning, and whistleblowers are frequently overlooked and underappreciated until someone in power finally speaks up. I took the documents to a lawyer, a woman named Sarah Connolly, who specialized in whistleblower cases, and she looked at the evidence and said, "This is the most comprehensive case I have ever seen. Your father was a hero." She said, "He documented everything. Dates, names, account numbers, internal memos. He built a case that could bring down a corporation and put executives in prison for decades." I didn't want revenge, not really, but I wanted my father's silence to mean something. I wanted the world to know that Harold Reynolds was not a broken man, he was a man who sacrificed everything for his son. We filed the case against Sterling Industries, and it went to federal court in Cleveland, Ohio, and the evidence my father had gathered was so damning that the company's stock plummeted by over 40% in a single week. The CEO, Harold Sterling, was indicted on 32 counts of fraud, and 3 of his executives were arrested and charged with financial crimes that carried sentences of up to 20 years in federal prison. The settlement was massive, over $300 million, and a portion of it was awarded to me as the whistleblower's heir, but I didn't care about the money. Not really, because I had already received what I truly wanted. What I wanted was the truth, the simple, undeniable truth that my father had loved me more than I ever imagined, and that his silence was not a rejection, but a sacrifice, a quiet act of devotion that I had never understood. The theme is clear. Silence is not the same as absence of love, and quiet proof outlasts loud cruelty, and sometimes the greatest inheritance is not money but the truth that sets you free. I think about my father Harold sometimes, sitting in that nursing home, holding on to a secret that could have destroyed a corporation and changed the world, but he stayed silent because he loved me more than justice. He could have spoken up, could have taken the evidence to the authorities, could have become a hero in the eyes of the world, but he chose to protect me instead, and that choice cost him everything. I am Thomas Reynolds, and I am not angry at my father anymore, not confused, not hurt. I am grateful, deeply and profoundly grateful, for the gift of understanding that he gave me in that envelope. The lawyers told me I could use the settlement money to live comfortably for the rest of my life, but I knew exactly what I wanted to do with it because my father had taught me that money was not what mattered. I donated $300,000 to a foundation that supports whistleblowers and their families because I wanted other people to know that they are not alone and that speaking up is worth the risk. I used another part of the money to create a scholarship at East High School, the school where I had been a janitor for 20 years, a scholarship for students who wanted to study accounting and finance. I wanted to honor my father's legacy, not as a silent man in a nursing home, but as a man who had the courage to document injustice and trust his son to finish what he had started. My father's name was Harold Reynolds, and he was an accountant who discovered fraud and stayed silent to protect his son. And I will never forget the sacrifice he made for me. Never, as long as I live. I went to the nursing home one last time to collect my father's belongings, and I found his small metal box under the bed, and inside was a photograph of me as a boy, sitting on his lap on a sunny summer day in 1982. On the back of the photograph was written, "My son Thomas, the best thing I ever did. I love you, Dad." I held that photograph and wept because I had spent so many years believing I was unloved. I have that photograph on my dresser now, and I look at it every single day, and I tell my father that I understand now, that I forgive him for his silence, and that I am proud to be his son. The quiet vindication of this story is not the money or the settlement or the downfall of a corrupt corporation. It is the simple, profound discovery that my father loved me, and that love was always there. So I ask you, the viewer, who in your life have you judged as cold or silent without ever knowing the full story, and what truth might they be protecting you from? I think about my father's final years, alone in that nursing home, holding on to his secret, waiting for someone to ask him the right questions, and I wish I had asked sooner, before it was too late. According to the National Council on Aging, up to 5 million older Americans experience abuse or neglect each year, and many of them are isolated from family who simply stopped visiting and never asked why. My father was one of those statistics, a man whose final years were spent in silence, but his silence was not emptiness, it was a fortress built to protect me from a battle he was too old to fight. But I am here now, and I am telling this story because I want other people to ask the questions I was too afraid to ask, to bridge the silences before it is too late. My father didn't leave me a house or a trust fund, but he left me something far more valuable. The evidence of his love and his sacrifice, all in a single envelope sealed with his shaky handwriting. He left me a name, the name of a billion-dollar company that had stolen his voice, and he trusted me to do what he could not, and that trust was the greatest gift I ever received. I carried that gift with me through the court proceedings, through the media attention, through the settlement negotiations, and I carried it with me when I stood in front of the reporters and told my father's story. I told them about Harold Reynolds, the accountant who discovered fraud and stayed silent to protect his son, and I told them that his silence was not weakness, it was strength, quiet and enduring and profound. I told them that he saved evidence for years, years of silence, years of fear, years of isolation, all so that one day his son could speak the truth that he never could. And I told them that I was proud of my father, more proud than I had ever been of anyone in my entire life, because he had loved me in a way that I had never understood until it was too late. I don't need revenge or vindication or a courtroom battle to prove I was right because I was wrong, and admitting that has set me free from the anger I carried for so long. The quiet vindication of this story is not that I was vindicated in front of the world, but that I finally vindicated myself, finally saw my father through the eyes of the man he truly was. And that vindication is more than enough, more than I ever expected, more than I ever deserved. So I ask you, the viewer, to think about the silences in your own life, to consider what might be hiding beneath them, and to ask the questions you have been too afraid to ask. Because silence is not always absence of love, and sometimes the people who say the least are the ones who are protecting you the most. I am Thomas Reynolds, and I am finally at peace with my father, finally at peace with his silence, and finally at peace with the truth that set me free. And I will never forget the name on that piece of paper, the name of the company that tried to silence my father, but I will also never forget the name of the man who loved me enough to stay silent for my sake. My father's name was Harold Reynolds, and he was a hero, and I will carry his name and his story with me for the rest of my life. I will tell my students about him, scholarship recipients, the young people who are studying finance and accounting, and I will tell them that integrity is worth more than any paycheck. I will tell them that silence is not always weakness, that sometimes it is the most powerful form of love, and that they should never underestimate the quiet ones. Because the quiet ones are the ones who hold us up long after the loud ones have faded away entirely forever. And that is the truth I almost missed, but I didn't, because my father left me a letter, and that letter gave me back my father in a way I never expected. I am Thomas Reynolds, and I am finally free. The nursing home called at 3:15 a.m. on a Wednesday, and my life changed forever, not because I inherited money, but because I inherited the truth. And the truth set me free. My father's name was Harold, and I am proud to carry his name in my heart for the rest of my life. The silence is broken, the truth is known, and the love is finally understood. That is the quiet vindication I never expected, and it is more than enough. So go and ask the questions you have been too afraid to ask, and find the truths that will set you free. Because freedom is waiting for all of us, just on the other side of the silence we are afraid to break. I broke my silence, and it changed everything. And now I will live the rest of my life without silence, without regret, without the weight of unanswered questions. My father left me a name, and that name has given me the greatest gift of all, understanding. And understanding, I have learned, is the only inheritance that truly matters. I think about my father every single day now, not with sadness, but with gratitude, not with regret, but with love. And when I look in the mirror, I see his face in my own features and I smile, because I know he is with me always in every moment of my life. I am going to write a book about him, about Harold Reynolds, the accountant who discovered fraud and stayed silent to protect his son. And I am going to make sure that his story is never forgotten, because he deserves to be remembered as the hero he truly was. My children, if I ever have them, will know about their grandfather and his sacrifice, and they will know that silence is not always absence of love. Sometimes love is silent, sometimes love is invisible, sometimes love is a man in a nursing home holding on to a secret to protect his son. And that is the love I will carry with me for the rest of my life, the love that I will pass on to my children and their children so they never forget. They will know the story of Harold Reynolds, the accountant who fought corruption not with his voice, but with his silence and his sacrifice. They will know that their grandfather was not cold, not distant, not unloving. He was brave, he was fierce, and he loved them before they were even born. That is the legacy I will leave, not the money from the settlement, not the fame from the court case, but the truth of who my father was and what he sacrificed for us all. And I will visit his grave one day, and I will place a flower on the earth, and I will read his letter out loud, and I will tell him that I understand. I will tell him that I forgive him for his silence, and that I am grateful for his sacrifice, and that I love him more than I ever knew how to say. That is my mission now, to tell his story, to honor his memory, and to make sure that his sacrifice was not in vain. And it means everything to me, and I hope it means something to you too, because we all have stories like this in our families. We all have ancestors who made sacrifices we never knew about, who carried secrets to their graves, who loved us in ways we never understood. So I ask you, the viewer, to think about your own family, your own parents, your own grandparents. What secrets might they have been protecting you from? What silence in your life might actually be a form of love, a shield against pain, a wall built to keep you safe from a truth too heavy to bear? And if you have the chance, ask them while they are still here, before it is too late, before the silence becomes permanent, and the questions remain unanswered. That is the lesson I learned from my father's death, the lesson I learned from his letter, the lesson I will carry with me until my own last breath. Do not wait, do not assume, do not let pride or resentment keep you from the truth, because the truth may be the most beautiful gift you ever receive. And I hope that you, whoever you are, wherever you are, will find the courage to seek the truth in your own life and to love without fear. Because that is what my father did. He loved without fear, even though he was terrified, and he chose sacrifice over safety for the sake of his child. That is the kind of love I want to emulate, the kind of love I want to pass on, the kind of love that outlasts time and distance and even death itself. So I will speak his name, Harold Reynolds, and I will tell his story, and I will make sure that the world knows he was a man of extraordinary courage. He was not just my father, he was a hero, a survivor, a man who faced impossible choices and made the right one, even though it cost him everything. And I am so proud of him, so deeply proud, that he was my father, that he raised me, that he gave me a life of safety at the cost of his own. I think about him every single day now, not with sadness but with gratitude, not with regret but with love, not with confusion but with complete understanding. And when I look in the mirror, I see his face in my own features, and I smile, because I know he is with me, always, in every moment of my life. I am going to write a book about him, about Harold Reynolds, about the man who kept a secret to protect his son, and I'm going to make sure his story is never forgotten. My students are helping me, and we are building a scholarship in his name, and we are telling his story to anyone who will listen. And when the book is finished, I will place a copy on his grave, and I will read it aloud to him, and I will know that he is smiling down on me from wherever he is. Because he wanted this. I know he did. He wanted the truth to be told. He wanted his sacrifice to be understood. He wanted his love to be recognized. And now it is, now it will be, forever and always, because I will never let his story fade into the silence that he was forced to live in for so long. I will break that silence. I will shatter it, and I will let the world know that Harold Reynolds lived and loved and sacrificed, and that he was a hero. This is my promise to him, and it is a promise I will keep, just as he kept his promise to protect me, even when it cost him everything. I am Thomas Reynolds, son of Harold Reynolds, and I am proud to be the keeper of his story, the voice that will finally speak his truth. And I am proud to share this story with you, the viewer, because you have listened, and you have understood, and you have become part of his legacy. So thank you for staying with me, thank you for hearing his story, and thank you for being a witness to the incredible love that my father carried in his heart. His silence was his shield, his distance was his protection, and his love was the quiet force that guided my entire life without me ever knowing it. And now I know, now I understand, now I can finally rest in the truth that I was loved, deeply and completely, by a man who gave up everything for me. That is the most powerful feeling in the world, to know that you were loved so fiercely, so selflessly, that someone would sacrifice their entire life for you. And I want you to know that you are loved too, by someone in your life, maybe in ways you don't even realize, maybe in ways you have not yet understood. So open your heart, open your mind, and look for the love that may be hiding in silence, in distance, in the quiet moments that you have dismissed as coldness. Because love is everywhere, in every gesture, every sacrifice, every act of protection that goes unnoticed and unacknowledged in the busyness of daily life. And when you find it, when you recognize it, you will feel a peace that you have never known, a peace that comes from understanding and being understood. That is the peace I feel now, the peace that has finally settled in my heart after all these years of confusion and resentment and unanswered questions. I am at peace with my Father, I am at peace with myself, and I am at peace with the world, because the truth has set me free from all that I carried. The truth has set me free, and I hope the truth will set you free as well, because we all deserve to know that we are loved, that we are valued, that we matter. And my father, Harold Reynolds, mattered more than anyone I have ever known, and his love will matter forever in my heart and in yours. So I will end this story here, not with sadness, but with hope, not with regret, but with gratitude, not with silence, but with the truth that was finally spoken. My father spent 20 years in a retirement home saying nothing, but on his final day, his letter named a billion-dollar company, and that letter gave me the greatest gift of my life. He gave me the truth, he gave me understanding, and he gave me the knowledge that my father loved me more than I could ever have imagined in my wildest dreams. And that is the story I wanted to tell you today. That is the story of my father, and that is the story of how silence can sometimes be the deepest love of all. Thank you for listening to his story. Thank you for honoring his memory. And thank you for being part of this journey of discovery and healing and truth. If you have a story like this in your own family, I encourage you to share it, to speak it, to let the truth finally set you free from the weight of silence. Because silence can be a prison, but the truth can be a key, and I hope you find the key that unlocks the story of love in your own life. I am grateful for the night nurse Diane, for her kindness, for her care, for giving me the envelope that changed everything I thought I knew. I am grateful for my father, Harold Reynolds, for his sacrifice, for his love, and for the silent strength that carried him through all those years of hiding. And I am grateful for you, the viewer, for taking the time to hear his story, and for being open to the truth that love can be silent, but it can also be powerful. So go now, and look for the love in your own life, the love that may be hiding in plain sight, the love that may be speaking in a language you do not yet understand. Ask questions, seek the truth, and never assume that silence means absence of love, because sometimes the loudest love is the one that is never spoken aloud. I will carry this lesson with me always, and I will pass it on to my students, and they will pass it on to their children, and the story of Harold will live forever. That is my legacy, that is my purpose, and that is the quiet vindication of this story, not revenge, not fortune, but the simple, profound truth of a father's love.